Question. I keep hearing that local plants are the most potent. Is it possible / reasonable to find or grow everything you need for health in your locality? I don't think that local plants are inherently the most potent plants. I don't even believe that there are most potent plants. And I know that people that live in certain areas sometimes say that. Like I've heard people say like, oh, the rainforest is such an intense and dynamic ecosystem that rainforest plants are incredibly potent. Or desert plants, because they survive in the desert, which is such an intense environment, are especially potent. But I just don't believe that like herbs from India are more potent than herbs for China, are more potent than herbs from Brazil, are more potent than herbs from Michigan, are more potent than herbs from like California, are more potent than like herbs from Norway. Right? Herbs grow in their habitat, they grow in their environment, and they're suited to that. They're growing in the place that they're supposed to grow. And so they're just doing what they do. So I don't think we need to think about like herbs from a specific locality are more potent. But if we think about herbs from your locality, where you live, are more potent than herbs from somewhere else, well, one reason that might be is because they're fresher, right? So if I think about red clover that I've gathered here in Michigan versus red clover that maybe I got in the bulk herb trade that came from Eastern Europe, I don't necessarily think that my red clover is inherently more potent than the red clover from Eastern Europe, but I do think that like my red clover is probably a lot fresher. It was probably collected and dried and processed on a much smaller scale, and I'm using it I'm using it sooner after it was collected than something that I would get that had gone through like a commercial herb trade. It's probably not like if it's an herb that's gathered in springtime, let's say cleavers, you gather cleavers in the springtime and you dry it, and then you're making teas with it or making medicine with it. Compared to buying cleavers that was grown in, Europe in the commercial herb trade, that's probably not from like that spring. So more time has gone by, and as more time goes by, and I think like when things are processed on a much larger scale, it's more likely that there can be, more degradation of a plant's constituents and potency, more potential for oxidation, more light or heat exposure. And so there's that. And then also when I think back about like the way that herbalism traditionally existed, before modern commerce, yes, the dominantly the plants you would use would be plants that grow locally. And yet there has always been herbs as like the most valuable objects of trade. There's always been herbs as like, I'm going to go on this trading trip from this place to this faraway place. What am I going to take to trade? I'm going to take herbs. And so people would have used stuff like that. They would have always used stuff from other places. I remember reading that they did a hair analysis on Egyptian mummies to find out like what kind of things that they were using. And they were shocked because they found traces of cocaine and nicotine, which means that they somehow had access to tobacco and coca. And those are South American plants that don't grow in Africa or Asia or Europe at all, which means that there was transatlantic trade at the time of ancient Egypt. That wouldn't have been the majority of something that everybody used, but it always would have been a part of herbalism. So I feel pretty good about that, and maybe that's also how I justify like my love and adoration of kava. So I want to say also that this is how I feel good about using herbs, mostly stuff from where I live, and then some stuff from other places, for me, a much smaller percent of stuff that comes from other places. But if someone's into Chinese herbalism or Ayurvedic herbalism or whatever herbalism, and they feel good about, getting most of their herbs from some other place because it's part of the tradition that they're into, then that's awesome. Like, that totally is great. I would say that ensuring the ethics of harvesting and sustainability is still incredibly important, but there's no reason that someone like has to use stuff or that it's a failing if they don't use stuff that grows by them. Different herbalists, different approaches.